Hey everybody, Dan Monaghan here today on Snare Drum Musings episode 2, taking a look at the 5x14 Rogers Chrome Over Brass Powertone. Yeah, here we go. Snare Drum Musings. Oh yeah. So I'm not an authority on Rogers drums. I think that the Powertones were produced between 1963 and 1973. The original drums had drawn brass lugs, what the collectors now call bread and butter lugs, which were less ornate than this. Early on in production, they switched over to these cast metal lugs, which the collectors now call beaver tail, and that descriptor is a lot more apt when you're looking at the single lug version as opposed to the double lug version. It has springed receivers inside. This drum had an internal muffler, which I've taken out because who needs it, and the infinitely adjustable type. And this drum is outfitted with the Swivomatic Permatension snare strainer, which, I mean, you know that's good. It's got 3 hyphens in it. How bad could it be? You know what I'm saying? The early version of these were a little rounder. These Swivomatic Permatension throw-offs are known collectively as the clock face throw-offs by the collectors. This is a later version that's been elongated, but there's some conflicting information about this drum because this is post-1967, but the tag on the inside says it's drum number 5898, and it was produced in Cleveland, Ohio, which makes it pre-1965, so it's possible this is an aftermarket replacement throw-off. Who knows? Not me. What I can tell you is that this occupies an interesting little niche in snare drum construction because it's a chrome over brass shell, which is a high-end building material. And I never met a brass snare drum I didn't love. Brass is like this magical material. It's all crispy and articulate. It's got a complex high end, and it's got tone, but it's still like it's still articulate and dry, and it's like it's a happy medium for so many things that I'm looking for. And it's a high-end material, but it's an 8-lug drum instead of 10, which is unusual, at least for the time. Once 10-lug drums became a thing, that was the gold standard for professional model snare drums. And with good reason. Not so much with a better head, but on the snare side, it allows for a lot more consistency of tuning, especially on the lugs between the snare beds, not the ones that surround the snare beds. And I really like that. I prefer 10-lug drums for that reason. But, and so like generally speaking, professional models were 10, and then the second tier models would have 8 lugs. And so, and that was the case with Rogers because by this time they already were producing the Dynasonic, which was their flagship, you know, super high-end professional model snare drum, and that was 10 lug. The Powertone was definitely a step down from that, and so it was 8 lug, but still having like a super high quality shell construction. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And having 20% less lugs on your drum definitely has a sonic impact. And in fact, now, in recent decades, manufacturers have intentionally made high-end snare drums with 8 lugs instead of 10 because there's less mass, so the shell can open up a little bit more and the drums can have more tone, they can be a little fatter. At the time, this was a cost-saving thing, but it has those properties. And coupled with these hoops, which are 1.6 millimeters, because that was the industry standard. And these are fairly tall, so that there's a stiffness just from the height, but it's a low mass hoop, 8 lugs instead of 10. And so yeah, this drum can sort of open up. It's got a lot of tone, so the name is at least half right. The other thing that contributes to that is one of the design improvements for the Powertones, and that was having a sharper bearing edge. It's hard to quantify with metal drums, but definitely around this time Rogers started putting super sharp bearing edges on their wood drums, and this drum seems to have a bearing edge that's folded over a little more than average. I don't know, but that was because of the advent of plastic heads. And so their stuff was getting sharper. Everybody was moving to plastic and from calfskin, and so the bearing edges were getting sharper. They wanted to get more tone out of the plastic and capitalize on all this new stuff. So they did. And so this drum is really cool in those ways. It's a brass snare drum, so it's got all of the brass stuff that you want and love. But it's low mass. So this drum can open up a little more than is typical with a brass snare drum, you know, an 8-lug brass drum. The cross stick thing is, it's okay. It's not great. I have to work a little harder at it than I would like. The height is good, so there's enough clearance here. But you know, because it's low mass and because it's only 8 lugs, so it's less stiff than you know, even a 10-lug version of the same 1.6 millimeter steel. But it's okay. The brush thing is nice. You know, it's 5-inch drum brass. That's cool. But good brush articulation. The one thing that I kind of don't like about this is the other design improvement that Rogers made at this time, and that was moving to a very, very low-risk snare bed. When the move to plastic happened, all the companies started sort of like relaxing or reducing their snare beds, so they became wider and shallower because plastic doesn't take as well to sudden changes in the bearing edges as calfskin. And I talked about this in the Ludwig LM400 video also. And Ludwig made the move from crimped beds to rolled in beds. Rogers changed theirs also. Man, this is like the most low risk snare bed. Man, it is really wide and really shallow, and so much so that I have to work a little harder with this drum than I would like to get the kind of focused articulation that I like out of a snare drum. And the other problem with that for me is as is evidenced by me talking above this thing, is you get more sympathetic snare buzz with the low risk snare bed. So I don't like that as much. So if I'm playing a super quiet gig, I probably won't take this because it's not as clean as drums with more pronounced snare beds. So piano trio, I probably wouldn't take this because the cross stick thing isn't epic. If I'm playing a lot of bossa novas, I might not pick this drum either. But if I'm playing like moderate volume and above, it's awesome because the drum can kind of open up. And if I'm playing in a room that's like a little on the dry side, but I still want to use a metal drum, there again, like this fills that hole too. And so this really does have some interesting sonic properties. So let's take a listen. So those are some musings on the 5x14 chrome over brass Powertone. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. You can also send me an email at danmonaghandrums@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.